Wait, work on bathroom, nails and wall, deposit check. I'm like, this is my to-do list, not my crosstabs note.
We're clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Welcome back to Crosstabs. I'm Reagan Canope, here with my co-host, Brian Iverson. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Reagan. I'm a little slow today just because I'm an indoor cyclist, which means I ride a Peloton. And I did many, many, many miles this morning and I'm very tired. But other than that, I'm good.
Good for you, Brian. You're out there hustling. Well, not out there.
Not
You're
out
in
there,
there hustling.
yeah. Reagan, let me tell you something about Peloton, which is kind of funny. I have been riding, Vicky bought me my Peloton in 2019 after I ran a marathon and I about killed myself running. So she said, maybe you should try cycling. You're not exactly a young buck anymore. So I've been cycling since 2019, indoor only. I am so afraid to get on an outdoor bike that I feel like cars are just going to kill me. Those bike Portland people and all those people talk about people dying all the time. So I'm just going to stay on the indoors. I've never fallen off. No car has ever hit me, and I get a pretty good workout. So I do enjoy the Peloton.
Well, that's exciting news, Brian, for Bike Portland, that you're pro indoor bikes. So there's something for you guys to work together on. Maybe you guys can require all bikes to be stationary. Brian, that probably sounds like the
Be a good
solution
law.
to. Yeah, that sounds great. Well, you know what isn't good law, Brian? I was reading the Oregonian last night, in fact, and there is a new opinion from the Ninth Circuit, and I'm going to work on bringing this up if I can find it. I should have had the link ready, Brian, but I don't because I'm not a professional. We're amateur podcasters. And basically, what happened is there was a bunch of criminals in Washington County that didn't feel like they were getting their defense attorneys fast enough. And they sued. A combination of the district court judge here in Oregon made a ruling. That's Judge Michael McShane. And then also the Ninth Circuit Court ruled. And basically, what they said is you have to give a criminal their attorney within 7 days of their initial appearance, or you have to let them out of jail. And then they quietly revised the opinion to say that applies to everyone except for murder and aggravated murder, because apparently in liberal fantasy world, even the murderers don't get as much constitutional rights as everybody else. So their opinion isn't even consistent. And I was reading the dissent from this, Brian, and truly incredible stuff. Judge Bumate, who was appointed by Donald Trump, called it judicial jailbreak. Basically, it's a totally different reinterpretation of the Sixth Amendment, which is a protection that we have in our Constitution that gives you the right to a trial by jury of your peers and speedy trial and all that. That's where all that case law comes from, Brian, is pretty much the Sixth Amendment. And they
Wow.
just rewrote it. They said if you don't get you're in violation of someone's Sixth Amendment rights if you don't give them an attorney within 7 days. And Oregon's in the middle of a public defense crisis right now. This causes about 100 criminals to be let out of jail today, and it is an ongoing. It has no stay, which means that it has to be implemented now. And even during any appeals process, which the Attorney General hasn't said necessarily that they're going to do yet, they're looking at this still. Brian, this is, I love the phrase judicial jailbreak because that's what it is. Horrible policy from the bench. And it's got me very concerned for Oregonian safety.
Because it's basically they're letting anybody out of jail that doesn't have a court-appointed attorney at this point.
Exactly.
And that's how many do we think was there a number like how many people are literally are they let out of jail like today? Are they out of jail?
I don't know if they're out yet. I'm looking to see. I'm hoping that there are a few journalists out there that want to do their job and really dig into this. I saw the kind of initial articles based on the opinion, but I haven't seen anything else. And the dissent said it affects about at least 100 people.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm looking at the dashboard, Reagan. There's 3,284 unrepresented criminal defendants in Oregon.
Now, not all of those are in jail, so it's not going to apply to that many because some of them are out on
Sure.
bail or aren't jailed because of space or their crime is too low level. But
Okay.
still, this is going to really have an impact. And I think it'll be an impact that'll be felt pretty quickly.
Oh, here it is. So 146 people as of Friday were facing criminal charges that are in custody. And so, including 55 who have been in custody for more than 7 days
Yep.
to the state judicial department. So, I mean, we know, I guess you definitely know more about this case than me. I haven't had a chance to read it too much, but the reality is we've been talking about, attorneys representing defendants for, I don't know, 2 years now at this point, since really COVID was kind of coming to an end. They kept talking like we don't have all these people, these public defendants. And they talked about, I mean, wasn't there a push to make them public employees at one point? Wasn't there a push I think there were some bills that we passed back in, not we, they passed, that were supposed to address this problem.
Senate
So
Bill 37, I think, Brian, in 2023 is going to move the Public Defense Commission from the Oregon Judicial Department to the governor's executive, make it an agency, basically. It's going to create more public employees. But here's the thing, Brian, and the
that's working
frustrating
well.
thing, right? Well, always shocking when the result includes creating more public employees, Brian. That's always the solution. But the thing here is that the defense system used to work. Now, I don't think it was perfect. I don't think anyone would say it was perfect, but it used to work. And then they implemented some new rules, caseload management, and other things like that, which broke the system. And instead of undoing those rules while they looked at how could we make the system better, they are just going to leave it broken while they transition, over a multi-year plan to move this agency or create a new agency, basically, right? And I think that's the frustrating thing for me. Think about the employment department and how they're handling their transition for their systems, how they've been handling paid leave Oregon. The answer is never, they don't want to do a short-term fix. They're going to let everybody be unsafe or not have their benefits while they do these multi-year transitions that, Brian, I just think at the end of the day, they take too long.
Are we calling these ones justice impacted individuals?
Well, first of all, I use the term
They're no longer
criminals.
adjusted. Yeah, they're no
They're,
longer
they're
justice
not criminals. Adults in custody, Brian. My apologies. Adults in custody apparently have had their rights. My question is, what about the rights of the victims of all of these crimes? And we used to care about what victims, and I still care about victims. I think you care about victims, Brian. I think a lot of people say they care about victims, but there's no concern for victims when the answer is 7 days or we're letting the criminals out. There just isn't.
Yeah, I feel like that's the part that gets lost in all of this. I mean, I understand there's a problem with the system and all the things, I get all that, but there is a problem. Obviously, everybody's entitled to a defense. I think that's fair. I think everybody agrees with that. Well, not everybody. I should say I agree with that. That they are entitled to a defense, regardless of the nature of their crime. But in all of that, don't the victims, aren't they entitled to something?
I think that Democrats have felt like we've been too pro victim and now they want to be pro criminal. They want to do all these things to lessen the impact of to the criminals. And at the end of the day, I just don't think that most Oregonians agree with that position. But there needed to be something that happened that caused an actual crime wave. And Brian, I can't imagine anything causing a crime wave more than releasing 100 people and releasing people if they don't get an attorney within 7 days. Like that. I think it will cause a crime wave. Will we see it immediately? Maybe not, but I think it will happen at some point. And Democrats should be concerned that it's happening in an election year.
You would think, especially if there's a crime wave. Hey, so maybe we should talk about another justice impacted criminal. Maybe, oh, that's a new buzzword. I could call it justice impacted criminal. They're a criminal who's now impacted by justice. I'm not sure how that all works. I really want to touch on Donald Trump and kind of what happened there and really what it means to us as Oregonians. I really think that that is where, that's where we're focused as a podcast, but obviously everybody's talking about President Trump and him being found guilty on charges from 2016 from where that happened, which is just seems erroneous and silly to me. But regardless of the fact, it happened. He was found guilty, but the reality is what does that mean here in Oregon? What does that mean for Oregon politics with Trump getting found guilty of felonies? And I really believe, Reagan, if you were to ask me, I think it's kind of good for us. The last pod we talked about turnout being so bad and Republicans really not having a whole reason to show up. And I really hope this backfires on Democrats and this galvanizes the base. I saw this morning an email from I think the Deschutes County Republican Party's doing a pro-Trump rally, this week, later this week. Jackson County's doing something later this week with some pro-Trump stuff. So it may wake up our kind of sleepy base that we have here in Oregon and really, really push people to show up and vote and maybe even pull some of those people that were anti-Trump just because they don't like the way the guy talks or what he does, to see that the true wrong of this justice system, that this craziness that Alvin Bragg started over in New York City, where they're literally just trying to find something where show me the criminal and I'll show you the crime kind of stuff, where they're just making stuff up as they go. And I really believe this is good for Republicans nationwide, let alone here in Oregon. And I'd be interested to see if does this put other states on the map potentially. I mean, President Trump's raised, north of $200 million since he was found guilty. I was throwing out a number, was it 3 or 4 days ago afterwards, and you were like, no, Brian, he's only raised like $30 million. Like, it's not that much. Like, and then all of a sudden, it's $30 million a day, Reagan. He's pouring in. And there was, at least I saw yesterday, there was something like 80 million of that was all super small dollar stuff, like 20, 40, $50 kind of stuff. That's impactful. And of that, I've heard two different numbers, roughly 25 to 30%, we'll just say, of that have never given to Trump. So that just goes to show you that's bringing in a whole new slew of people that are to his camp that are basically saying this is just crazy. I don't
I
know
have
what you
two
take on it.
I have two things on that, Brian. The first one is when you think of like a MAGA Republican, I think you probably think of Mitt Romney, right? He's just the poster child for being a MAGA Republican. Oh, wait, no, he's not. He's nobody's idea of a MAGA Republican. In fact, he is often saying things that are oppositional or at least not helpful to Trump. And here's what he said about the conviction. Quote, Bragg should have settled the case against Trump as would have been the normal procedure, but he made a political decision. Bragg may have won the battle for now, but he may have lost the political war. Democrats think they can put out the Trump fire with oxygen. It's political malpractice. And if you've got Mitt Romney basically saying that the DA made the wrong decision, you've just united the party, the Republican Party, not the Democratic Party. You've united the Republican Party. And what I see a lot of on Twitter, especially with the kind of lefty or more anti-Trump Republicans, is they're basically like, look, you can claim to say, and Democrats have been running on defending democracy, and then they bend our democratic system and try to break the rules or bend the rules to just to get Trump out of office or to prevent him from holding office. And that's hypocrisy at the end of the day. If you don't believe our institutions are strong enough to stand up to whatever threat you think Donald Trump is or whatever threat you think the next president could be, right? Then you don't have democratic institutions. They aren't strong enough, and you're going to collapse the system. The other thing I think about that, Brian, is something that was in my brain that has left my brain now because I'm getting older.
I looked real
So,
quick to see if Chris Christie, because the other Trump hater, I figured
yeah,
I'd check his Twitter to see. He's been silent since like Mother's Day. So I don't know if he's still reeling from his incredible 1.7% primary wins that he was gaining. So I think he's kind of out of it, but I think
I
that'll be
remembered what I was going to say, Brian.
yeah.
Back to our conversation about criminal justice. Democrats spend the last 10 years saying our justice system is broken. They say that there's injustice everywhere, and they're pointing out everywhere there's injustice. Okay. And then Trump gets convicted, and Republicans are saying our justice system is broken. And Democrats are going, oh, wait a minute. That's not what we meant. And so they sowed the opportunity for this, and now the conviction is here, and you see swing state Democrats afraid to even talk about the conviction because they're not sure how it's going to play. And that's the number one indicator, Brian, that may not be a political winner for them. Like, whatever you think about how, I don't know enough about New York courts or anything to know, did that case go down correctly or not? Okay. There's a lot of indications and stuff that pop up on social media, but it's hard for me to be able to fact check that without being a New Yorker, understanding the system, all that stuff. So I'm putting that aside. If you just look at based on these, which by the way, these swing state guys, especially in big congressional and Senate races, they're doing polling every week. They've got numbers on this. The numbers are probably mediocre. It means this isn't an obvious political winner. And I think you go back to the democratic norms. Brian, we don't put our political opposition in prison. We don't do it. They do it in banana republics. They do it in third world countries. They do it in Russia and China. That is not something that we do in America. And I think at the end of the day, people are fed up with this attack. And I mean, you think these are high fundraising numbers. Wait, if they sentence him and send him to jail, these numbers will be 10 times that amount.
Do you believe that, the George Soros DA plan, the Mike Schmitz of the world that they were instilling across the country or trying to was all bent for this idea of basically, punishing political enemies? And I think a lot of people fear if it can happen to Trump, for some some trumped up charge, really, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, if you go look at my business records, and you were to sit there and, comb through them over the last 10 years, you'd probably find one or two things that I didn't do right, So, I mean, I think we're all afraid of the IRS thing when Biden, like hiring all these IRS agents to go out and start auditing people. And, we figured that was just a money play. I'm just worried that, where does it end? Where does my political free speech end? Does it, do they come and arrest me here on this podcast because of what I'm saying about Democrats? I think that's a real concern for people. And I think that's where people are really that are, I think, on the fence sitters on this one. Obviously, I've been a Trump fan ever since. I wasn't on anybody else's bandwagon. Sorry, Bill Post. I'm not a DeSantis guy. I've always been a Trump guy. That's just where I've been, right? I just feel that there wasn't anybody in that primary that I felt had the gumption and the tenacity that Trump did. And so I've always been a Trump guy. If there's somebody else coming, great. I'll hop on that bandwagon too. But I just feel like people are really concerned in that movable middle, right? The stuff that we talk about all the time. How do we move those people in the middle? I think some of that stuff resonates with them where they just go, geez, man, this just seems it just feels like it's a little too much.
Makes sense to me, Brian, in the sense that, like, that's a thing that a lot of people feel. And I don't think, here's the thing with voter sentiment, the politicians don't have to agree if the voters think it's true. It just is true. Like, I think that's the thing is on these issues where you can see both sides and there isn't really necessarily a for sure, like, I can prove that that's true or I can prove that it isn't true, Brian. If that's how the voters feel, they're going to vote based on that, and that's the result you're going to get. So, and that's what I think public officials sometimes miss with the voter sentiment is, yes, sometimes voters don't have all the information that you have or the exact set of information you have, but they're interpreting it based on their lives and what they care about. And if you're not responsive to voters' concerns, eventually they're going to toss you out of office and replace you with somebody who will. That's a good public servant, someone who looks at what people are concerned about and says, okay, we need to do less of that because people are worried about it. I was having breakfast this morning with somebody and I said, what if we just focused on the issues that made it easier for all the people in these diners to live their lives? That is what is going to make the first, if we figure that out as Republicans, we're going to win more. And if Democrats figure that out, they're going to win more. And that's just political reality at the end of the day.
When I do campaigns, we always try to talk about that. Just, what's the blocking and tackling? What is the, not necessarily back to the basics, but it's the blocking and tackling of legislation and just people say kitchen table issues, just the basics, right?
Speaking of the kitchen table, Brian, that's where you put food. And I saw this article from OPB about the Oregon Food Bank. My transitions are going to get even more crazy,
Love it.
Brian. They're going to become
Yeah.
legendary. Jewish orgs pull support from Oregon Food Bank over Gaza war statement. And I could go off on this, but I want you to get first crack at this, Brian. The Oregon Food Bank puts out a statement about a month ago almost. So, I mean, I don't think the Jewish orgs were looking for the first opportunity. I think they were engaging with the food bank saying, hey, here's what we think about your statement. And I'll link it up. People can read it. I think it's crazy. My guess is you think it's crazy. Why is the Oregon Food Bank putting out a statement about Gaza? And does that help feed a single Oregonian is my question.
It's a very good question, Reagan. I was polling a bunch of stuff on Oregon Food Bank. I mean, you and I know that the food bank is nothing but a political organization, right? They're no different than anybody else in there. But I was polling their 990s, which is all public record, public information, and their mission statement is the root causes of hunger. So maybe their root cause of hunger is Jewish people. I don't know. Is that their is there? Do they hate them so much that that's a root cause? Like there's too much Jewish people in the food business. I don't know. I mean, I don't even know why they're weighing in on it. Like it makes no sense to me. And I went back and looked. Of course, they've only got 2021 reports, so they're behind in reporting to the DOJ. Maybe the DOJ, Department of Justice, could actually look into the food bank because they're behind. They should have their reports in, and they should be posted online. In 2021, they had 70 million. This is just Oregon Food Bank, by the way. Oregon. They have 70 million in assets. Their revenue in 2021 alone was $106 million. And they spent $80 million on some sort of programs and services to feed people that are apparently hungry. These could range anywhere from school meal programs to homeless programs, stuff like that. Then I had to dive a little bit further. Their management is paid somewhere around $2.8 million a year for the management of the Oregon Food Bank, and their fundraising alone, they spend over $7 million a year fundraising that $106 million that they get in donations, which most of it comes from taxpayers. We know this. So, and their CEO at the time, Susanna Morgan, I don't even know if she's still the CEO today. I think she is. She makes $220,000 in 2021 in a nonprofit. And I think when Governor Kotek was at the food bank, I don't believe she was making $220,000. And then they have 7 other officers all making north of 120, 130,000 bucks each. It's just amazing to me, Reagan. I don't get it. And there's been a few representatives and senators on the floor anytime the food bank has come up, for getting something on the legislature. God bless a few of those people that have said, I vote no because this is a political organization. And I agree with them. And more people need to know how much of a political organization this group is.
You're just spot on there, Brian, and I appreciate you. You're always bringing the data, and I think it's funny they spent 7 million in 2021. I'm pretty sure 2021 was a year in which they got a lot of COVID dollars that came from the federal government to the state and that the state shuffled. And in a situation where you've put people out of work, of course it makes sense to feed them. So like I think the theory behind that all makes sense, but it's time to stop doing it through the Oregon Food Bank because you talk about their root causes of hunger. And I could see where if there was a war that was occurring in Oregon, how it might be hard for people to get food. And you might be against that war. Okay. Under what circumstances there'd be a war in Oregon, I'm not sure. That would be interesting to say the least. But let's just pretend there was. I think at that point, maybe a statement. But again, Brian, a statement doesn't do anything. A statement doesn't feed a single person and it doesn't stop a single bomb from being dropped. Okay. So let's go back to Oregon Food Bank. What they should be focused on is hunger in Oregon. I would just be fine if they even focused on root causes of hunger in Oregon. But again, and I think when they really started to get political, or at least when people really started to notice, I'm pretty sure they came out in favor of Measure 97, the sales tax, the tax on sales that became what we now know as the corporate activity tax that got passed over voters' objections because voters voted down Measure 97. And it was at that point where everyone went, oh, you're supporting a tax on businesses. And that money was supposed to go to education and stuff like that. And again, I'm not denying that some of this stuff isn't connected, but I think it doesn't make sense to me that you're making a statement on a war in the Middle East and that's going to impact how Oregonians are fed. They don't even try to draw a line directly. And so let's go back to the Jewish organizations because you talk about DEI and a lot of the stuff that Democrats are doing. They say inclusion is super important to them. Listen to this. First of all, these Jewish organizations are saying anti-Semitism is on the rise. A lot of it because pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protesters are attacking Jewish people on college campuses and other places, right?
People like Food Bank are putting out freaking memos to, blasting them. Maybe that's why.
Morgan disagreed with the claim that the food bank published false accusations, which is what the Jewish groups are saying. If you look at it, they make so many crazy claims in that statement, it would be hard to verify a lot of them. She says that the initial statement, quote, reflects the realities and information is derived from credible national and international sources. Most of that republishing stats from Hamas about how many people died. Oregon Food Bank also consulted with community groups before publishing the letter, including the Jewish Federation of Oregon. She said the director of the Jewish Federation of Oregon said his organization raised concerns and that the statement hardly changed at all after they raised the concerns. Oh, we're listening to be inclusive and diverse, but we're going to ignore your feedback and just go along with our pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist statement. Sounds good. That's great DEI program they got running there, Brian.
It is absolutely horrible. I can't imagine an organization like Oregon Food Bank. Again, to your point, like just go feed people. Like, I don't care. I mean, feed homeless people, feed people that don't have money, like feed, have the pickup spots where people can come get some free food. Like, hey, that's all well and good, right? I don't have a problem with an organization doing that, but they have no business being in this game. And I love it when they say credible sources when they never actually, name the sources. I hate that stuff in quotes that these stupid PR people put on their thing. And they just, because I can just say that too. I have credible sources that says the Oregon Food Bank is corrupt organization. Credible sources, Reagan. Yeah.
Contribute to local organizations in your community that are feeding people. And I really ton of credit to the Jewish organizations in Oregon for putting their money where their mouth is and saying enough is enough. We will feed hungry people. We're not doing it through the Oregon Food Bank. I sort of wish the Oregon
Yeah.
legislature would grow the same spine and start cutting off the funding until these guys get their act together because it at the end of the day, completely ridiculous.
In communities in the past, and this probably I know is way before your time, but even me being a Gen Xer, I remember when we were pretty poor growing up in Sandy, there was a few times I remember my mom going down to the church and they were giving away some Thanksgiving turkeys and some other stuff, right, to help make Thanksgiving dinner a little bit more special for people who couldn't afford it. And those churches, were in the communities. They were the conduits of feeding that community that was hungry. I don't remember and I don't recall, but I could be wrong, them putting out a press release against Jewish people, the churches. So I kind of feel like the food bank, they make up these organizations that come in and create a nonprofit to solve a problem that you can't solve. Like you're not going to solve, that hunger. You can't just solve hunger. Like it's impossible to solve. It's like solving homelessness. You're never going to solve it. So, and then they just get a bunch of taxpayer money and then just weaponize it and turn it into a political organization.
Speaking of things that are horrible, Brian, turnout in non-affiliated races, especially in this last May primary. Now, we did 2 episodes. It was so long, we had to break it up into 2 episodes. Well, guess what, everybody? Part three.
The final of our primary races.
Brian, the headlines conspire to create great podcast content and great stuff for us to talk about, and hopefully they keep it up. First, some follow up with the race we've already talked about, and then we just kind of want to cover. I will say, how about I give a result, Brian, and then you can kind of
Yeah.
give your input, and then you can give me another result, and I'll give you the short version. We'll just go back and forth, kind of tackle them that way. But the way I'm looking at it now, there's still some curing of ballots, some challenge signatures that are going to show up, but with less than or about 300 ballots left in all of Benton County, I think this House District 16 Democratic primary is over. Looks like Sarah Finger McDonald has won. She'll probably win by the time this is over by a little over or around 180 votes, which is a close win, but secure enough and outside that recount margin where I think it's this one's over. And I think Sammy put up a good fight, and I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised to see him again.
Yeah, I think you could spin it into, city council race or something like that. That I would imagine there's a decent number of people there that voted for him. That he's probably going to be able to do that. I think that's worked. I've seen that work before. Our buddy Alan Stout over there in Springfield, no, he ran such a good state rep campaign last time against Lively. Nobody challenged him for Springfield City Councilor. He won with 100% of the votes, so not too far away. Good job, Alan.
All right, Brian, we're going into rapid fire mode.
Okay.
Multnomah County DA, we talked about crime earlier. Nathan Vasquez does come out victorious and much needed win for our friend Dan Levy. What's your breakdown on what happened here in this DA's race?
Well, definitely the suburbs of Multnomah County pulled the weight on this one. There's no doubt. I mean, if you look at the map, or Oregonian actually did something decent, put a precinct map out of votes. I thought was pretty good, and it really shows that inner areas of Portland voted for Schmidt, and then as you went further out, either direction, in any direction, Vasquez just started destroying them to the point to where he was taking 70-30 in some precincts, and especially in East Multnomah County, I really saw that they really basically said, yeah, this ain't happening. We're done. And what I also noticed too is like the West Hills and stuff voted for Vasquez. I thought that was kind of interesting. But there was still a lot of late ballots that came in to tighten this race up a lot closer than we thought. I think originally when we first did the podcast, the first episode 1 of the primaries, I think Vasquez had probably a 62-38 margin at that point, and it settled into about a 54-46, somewhere in there, 53 percent. So it's not a mandate, I would say, not a clear mandate, but in Portland, I would say that's pretty decent mandate on that. So I believe that people were done with Schmidt, and that brand of politics is, I think OPB did an article, or they did a podcast on, is progressivism dead in Portland. I think it's just changed. I think that the old progressive, kind of hippies that were in Portland have moved. It's kind of divided. I think you have now this very, left wing. I don't even, it's not fair to even call them progressives. I think it's not fair to the progressives. The food bank people, right? That are the DSs, the DASs. I think you have the socialist, and then you kind of have this still progressive wing of Portland. Progressivism doesn't mean they want criminals everywhere and crime everywhere. I think they want everybody to get along and all the sort of things that come along with progressive ideals. But I don't think they wanted what Schmidt was selling.
I think the argument for progressives, especially in Portland, is get yourself some progressives who can produce results. Because at the end of the day, as as a conservative person, it's pretty hard for me to argue with good results. I can't, there's nowhere for me to go with that. But if you're going to be progressive and break everything in your path, then I'm going to have some ammunition. And this is what Vasquez had, was basically actually, let's prosecute criminals. It was really funny because you could always count on it. I was looking at, and I would see occasionally a Mike Schmidt press release come through. He was always prosecuting white collar crime. But the minute it came to like actually dangerous criminals, then it was, well, we need to be sensitive here. And at the end of the day, people want real crime prosecuted. And then if you've got extra time, go after the guys who are stealing and embezzling money. But let's not get those flip flopped. Like you said, Brian, let's do the basics correctly. If
Yeah.
people are dying on the streets, kind of doesn't matter if you locked up a white collar criminal at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the white collar criminals either, but I think that physical crime, where you're actually murdering people, abusing people, all assaulting people, like that stuff, there's only one deterrent that comes in that, and that is the fact that you'll go to jail and you're going to be there a long time. And I believe that's just the problem. I always thought, gun control is a funny thing when they say, and people that are big gun advocates, that are big Second Amendment people, we've always said, well, just make doing a crime with a gun mandatory sentencing, and that'll drop any sort of crimes with a gun, right? But they don't want to do that. Rather, they'd want to come take our guns away from law-abiding citizens. So law-abiding citizens, by the way, don't commit crimes for the most part. Criminals don't care. Well, county commissioners, we can run through Multnomah County real quick. And I'll just, Reagan, I can just kind of run through these. In position 1 in Multnomah County, Megan Moyer and Vadim Mazrisky. Maybe I said that right. They're both going to go on to the November ballot, which should be pretty interesting. They were pretty close, 47-40 roughly. So that one should be a pretty interesting race, I think, in the fall. And then I'm going to jump to position 3, which Julie Brim Edwards. She won, so she's done. So she doesn't have to do a runoff. And then position 4, which I thought was kind of interesting, is which is the east side of the county, and that's Vince Jones Dixon, narrows out 50.29%. So he wins against Brian Knott's 41.5%. So that one was kind of interesting, I thought, Reagan. And then the other one, and then I'll get your thoughts on the commissioner races, is Sam Adams moves forward with Shannon Singleton in District 2. That should be very interesting, I think, this fall.
Well, Brian, what this really highlights, I think, above all things, is that you making fun of me for going with the Willamette Week picks, you can continue to do, but I'm just going to continue to be right. At the end of the day, it seems like people are more likely to listen to Willamette Week than they are to the Oregonian endorsements. Now, there were some candidates they both endorsed, but at the end of the day, I think Willamette Week sort of understands the median Portland voter a little bit better. Not that the Oregonian's wrong about everything, but I think just in their endorsement processes, I think the Oregonian is pushing for a certain outcome that's probably more aligned with what I think, but Willamette Week understands where the median voter is and what they're looking for. And like we just talked about, they're not abandoning progressivism, but they're looking for people who've actually done stuff. And like him or not, Sam Adams gets through because he accomplished some things. Megan Moyer, I work with her at the Capitol. She does stuff for Disability Rights Oregon, and sometimes they fight with the big agencies and the people who are, hurting folks with disabilities. And I think these other guys that have moved through, they have resumes of getting things accomplished. Julia Brim Edwards, she'll buck the far left sometimes when it needs to be done. And so I think Sam Adams has to make that case to survive. He barely squeaks into that runoff. Vadim Mazrowski has to make that case in order to win. And Vince Jones Dixon, unless there's some late ballot cures that go really hard for Brian Knotts, I think he will hold on to that and barely win. But I think he shouldn't consider that a mandate for a guy with an impressive resume. And I think you said you'd met him and was impressed by him. I think he should have done a little better in that race, frankly. And props to Brian Knotts for running hard as a Republican in that District 4. I think Republicans should target that and continue to run really solid candidates and try to get somebody on that Multnomah Commission to hold the Democrats accountable.
Wouldn't it be great if they had just one Republican on that Multnomah County commissioner? Because I mean, a lot of times people feel like, oh, it's only one voice, but yeah, but it's just a voice. It's having that voice where you're just kind of saying the other side of the argument. Even if you lose every time, at least you're making the argument. And that's how you make political change over time, is you got to have somebody making the argument there. I do agree with you. I mean, I don't even know how much time we'll spend talking about these races into the fall, because they're probably not as exciting, because Megan Moyer will win. The D party will coalesce behind her. She moves forward, I think, and wins. She's only got to pull 3 more percentage points. Vadim isn't going to be able to do that. I don't think he was pulling any money. Shannon Singleton should be able to get enough people behind her. I think Sam Adams will make a case, but I just don't see it, to be honest with you. I just don't see him being able to shake his history too much to make a difference there. And I think the D's sometimes are pretty good about turning the page on stuff, especially in Portland. I did agree with your argument with the Oregonian and Willamette Week. I do think what you said there was really true, and I never heard you say it before, but just that idea that they have a pulse on the every average Portland Democrat, right? They have more of a pulse on what that person's thinking. Cause like is it the Portland Mercury? Isn't that the crazy far left newspaper? Like they were way off on their predictions, right? We should have had some fun and put all of theirs up, because that was even more hilarious than the Oregonians. But I think the editorial board probably lives in the West Hills, and they probably don't have the pulse on the every average, Portland Democrat out there. So, but I know I don't have the pulse on the average everyday Portland Democrat, Reagan. So
And I just listened to Willamette Week. That's how I was able to figure it out. So nothing special, no special sauce there, Brian. A place where I haven't spent very much time, but I think you, Brian, have spent a little bit more time than I have in Clackamas County. And I would describe it as the true battleground county of Oregon. If you can swing Clackamas, you've got a chance statewide and in competitive races that take in a good chunk of Clackamas, right?
I
And I'm just going to read these results and you tell me what you think. Clackamas County Commissioner, position one, which is the chair, Tootie Smith gets 40% of the vote. Originally, she was trailing former Sheriff Craig Roberts, and he was at over 50%. And then the late ballot swung conservative, very hard for Tootie. She makes the runoff. Then you've got Martha Schrader winning 57% of the vote against two opponents, neither of which they basically split the opposition pretty evenly.
mm-hmm.
And then position four, which Brian is the one I cannot explain, because Tina Irvine was the candidate with the profile and the money to really do well in this race. And, it's her first race. So I think sometimes that has an effect, but 18% is all she gets. Melissa Fireside gets 36%, and Mark Scholl, the controversial incumbent Republican who spent a grand total of $0, 37%, makes the runoff and gets the most votes in the primary. Uh, what's your, you can go specific races and then tell me like overall.
I think the 2D one that'll be an expensive race in the fall. I'll say that. I think she's got a path. She's got to figure it out, and she's probably got to do some better oppo on Craig Roberts, because she's going to have to pull some votes from him. So I think that's my take on that race. Schrader, I think you're right. I think the name ID there, she's just been around. Like I think you've mentioned it, that people weren't quite done with Kurt Schrader, so they brought Martha back. And she's, been, I think, a fairly decent commissioner too. So from what I hear in that neighborhood, the real loser in this whole thing is Tina Irvine. I mean, you couldn't even, mount any sort of campaign against Mark Scholl, and I think Mark Scholl's the big winner, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't really know Mark. I mean, I think I met him once or twice, but you spent $0 and you've been hammered in newspapers and everywhere. And I mean, he got 37%. I don't know if that's going to be his plan in the fall, to spend $0. So I don't know if like the Tina Irvine voters are disenfranchised Republicans that went to Tina, or they don't even know, but Melissa Fireside's a Democrat. I know that. So if Mark Schul's able to pick up those Tina Irvine voters, I mean, he should win, which would be it'll be interesting. I'm gonna forget about those or I'm gonna really think about in that Mark Schul race, like what did Republicans do in that one? Because obviously he clearly got a 37, 38% of those hardliners that aren't changing their mind. So the county sheriff I thought was pretty interesting in that one. Just I think it's the only other one I really cared about in Clackamas County, but Angela Brandenburg, she won going away. So I thought that was pretty interesting too. So that she doesn't have to go into the fall. So that one's interesting. But you're right, Clackamas County's it's definitely where we had a strong Senate race last time. You know, there was $3, $4 million spent in that Senate race in that North Clackamas County. It's where the battlegrounds are going to be. It's really the DMZ of the intersection between Republican and Democrat as it touches the metro area. So it'll be a fight for the next few years for sure.
Quick one to cover, Brian. I don't think there's much to say on this, but Lindsey Bershauer was behind on election night. Wasn't looking to make the runoff in a three-way race against Bubba King, but he's dropped now to 49.5%. So she does make the runoff with 45%. I think that she can probably flip some votes back. David S. Wall ran in that, and I think he's run for Congress or something before as a Republican. So my guess is a lot of those votes are her votes that he was eating up, and I think she'll be able to win that one back. But Yamhill, another one of those battlegrounds where if you lose Yamhill, you're going to lose the war for just the rest of the state ultimately. And I mean, you see what happened in Deschutes County with the commission there. Now, I think the CD5 race really juiced Democratic turnout in a way that there just wasn't any other race for Republicans, which certainly helped. But even the percentage he got there sort of leads me to believe that voters in Deschutes are keeping Phil Chang as a counterbalance on the commission to the two other Republicans. Probably is kind of my best guess at why they're doing that. But we're outside of the time now where Deschutes is an automatic red county, and Greg Walden figured that out early on and ran hard there in 2018. I think that was his last race. And so you've got Deschutes, you've got Clackamas, you've got Yamhill. I think these are basically the battlegrounds for the next 4 to 6 years as we're going into the 2030s, which is a really scary number to say. But that's where I'm going to look. And I think where you'll just continue to see these competitive races pop up throughout the state.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I'd probably throw Marion County in there as another kind of battleground county. I think D's probably have a little bit more of a stronghold on that county, but definitely Yamhill because of all the people moving there from Portland, Clackamas because of the people moving there from Portland, and Deschutes is, out here in my neck of the woods, we're dragging people in from California and Seattle and Portland, which isn't good for us in Deschutes County, especially when I'm in the neighboring Crook County, which I'm pretty happy I'm here and not in Deschutes County. But that the CD5, CD6 races should play a lot into how those things look this fall. So I'm going to be curious to see if Mike Erickson can turn Yamhill County into a hotbed for him. So if he can try to take on, Salinas in that race, and then of course we all know that the Bynum, Lori Chavez Dreamer race in CD5 is going to be a barn burner. So it should make Clackamas County, Deschutes County really, and even parts of Marion County for that point should be very competitive and very interesting on legislative races as well as local races.
Yeah, speaking of local races, that Salem mayor's race, Julie Hoy ends up winning that battle of the same last name there. And ultimately, Brian, I think the only thing I can look at there, I mean, I think Julie and her team ran a really good race. I think they kept it about local stuff. They didn't let it get eaten up into the statewide and national issues. And you got to do that in an area that's as liberal as Salem is becoming, really. But it was the payroll tax. Chris Hoy as the mayor is the leader. And if he says, I think one of my predictions, or sort of backward looking hindsight 2020, if he puts the brakes on the payroll tax, he might survive. But even then, I mean, that was going down 80-20. And so how do you look at that and go, well, I know more than the average voter about our budget situation? Sure, technically you might be correct, but guess what they know? Their own finances and what they're willing to and able to afford for government. And when you tell voters, we deserve your money, I think a lot of times they'll say, let's put the brakes there, sir, and have a better conversation that includes the impacted taxpayers. And the payroll tax was so dumb. It included people who didn't live there.
Yeah, like me and you, uh, and the governor and other people that are pretty upset about it as well. I think you really hit on something with payroll taxes versus say like property tax measures. And we saw a lot of different property tax measures, whether it was fire or school or whatever. It's kind of a mixed bag throughout the state. I think it was some areas they passed and some they failed. And I don't know, it was probably more the merits of each of those needs. But property taxes are just slightly different than payroll taxes. When you go right after my paycheck, people get pretty territorial. Property taxes can be seen a little bit differently. So payroll, heck no. That's good for us, I think, statewide. I think seeing something like that it'll make those other city councils, I think, pause before they try to do something crazy like that. If you're listening, City of Bend, some of these crazy cities that are getting further and further in left and left, and then looking at more and more programs to fund, they're going to run out of money and they're going to look to ways to fund those. Payroll tax is not the way to do it.
One place I want to look also, a place that, could become a battleground, Brian, but is still a red county. Jackson County had three measures that I was just fascinated by, and we talked about these in
Yeah.
pre-election coverage, and I wanted to break down how these went because I think there's a clear message in these ones. So there was three. The first one, making Jackson County commissioners nonpartisan. Apparently, the voters didn't think that partisan labels on these commissioners was a problem. It's almost like the party labels give you information about the candidates, Brian. That goes down 56-43. Moving from 3 to 5 Jackson County commissioners also goes down very similar margin, 54-45. And then cutting Jackson County commissioner salaries. And I think they were approaching the 125, 150 range, and this sets them down at 75. So, above median income, certainly for Jackson, but not as lucrative as it was. That passes with flying colors, 63-36. It's almost like the voters are saying, the politicians we have, we understand. We don't want more of them. And yes, we will cut your pay down to more of a working class job description, Brian. What do you think of those?
That's it. Isn't that what statewide offices get paid, like 77,000 a year? So it's kind of right in that number, which is some people still feels like a decent amount of money, right? 75 grand a year or so it is. I think you're right. The good government stuff, what I found interesting is that most people are going to vote for good government, especially for lower pay in government. Nobody wants a government official to be making that much. I wish they'd do something with nonprofits as well in regards to cutting their pay back a little bit. Commissioners is a tough one because, it is a tough job. I don't think you need more than three in these counties that, especially the size of Jackson, usually they try to, if you're behind as a Republican or as a Democrat in a county like Jackson where you have three Republicans, of course you want to make there be more, and then that way you maybe make them wards. So you could find some, say in Medford or some of those areas where they're blue, but I think three is probably plenty until you get a county of like Lane size and higher. Marion County may be kind of getting to that point. Do you really need more than three people really directing the future of county government? Most of them have administrators. Kind of really no point. The dollars is kind of interesting with those, which would be kind of interesting. But I think good government wins. Good government bills win. Most people want good government. I think and they don't want to pay for it. So I think that won in Jackson County. I'm actually pretty excited about those results, to tell you the truth. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. The last thing I'll touch on, Reagan, with local races is my own right here in Crook County. Um, our Greater Idaho passed in Crook County, even though Democrats out of Portland, Western States Strategies, whoever the hell that dark money group is, was sending mailers into the county talking about how horrible Idaho is and really trying to push, the vote to the other side. And it failed. and Crook County voted in favor of Greater Idaho. Doesn't mean we're moving tomorrow to Idaho. Actually, I guess we don't have to move. The borders just kind of all of a sudden they put a net on Deschutes County. But what it really speaks to is that people in rural Eastern Oregon, don't align themselves with the rest of the state. Is what it's really doing. Is just the frustration comes out of that. It bores out of that whole idea, and they're like, yeah, if I could be in Idaho, why wouldn't I want to be in Idaho? I don't know if there's a reality to it ever actually happening. It's a lot easier than being a new state. I know that in the grand scheme of 1,000 times harder to do. But I believe it really will help open up those conversations that we can have with the governor's office, with agencies, things like that, that the water in Eastern Oregon is different than the water in Western Oregon, how you get the water, how the water is managed, all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's just one faucet of many things where we just live differently out here. I don't have neighbors. I live on our ranch. People have neighbors in neighborhoods and stuff. So you live differently when you have neighbors. And a lot of us out here just don't. So I think that's definitely something different than we are here. So I'm glad to see the Greater Idaho movement win in Crook County, especially when Portland Democrats were spending money trying to defeat it, which I just find silliness. And it tells me that Crook County is where Deschutes County Republicans will be moving to.
You guaranteed to be right there, Brian. And I just like half of me thinks that those dark money mailers are funded by George Soros. I just have this feeling that it usually ties back to him or one of his groups. So I
I
wouldn't be
agree.
shocked. Brian, I'm reading this tweet. This is the last thing I want to talk about because I know people have other things to do than
Uh-oh.
listen to us. But as long as they listen to us first, I'm happy. Gary Warner, who used to be at the Bulletin, that's where I got to know him. He tweets, Pamplin Media sold to Carpenter Media. The buzz is that Eastern Oregon media will have large number of layoffs and be up for sale in an announcement later today. And I think this is sort of interesting and sort of dovetailing with that Eastern Oregon feeling, Brian, that you're talking about, where the EO Media Group is sort of tied in with Portland Media. And I've talked to Republicans out in Eastern Oregon. I talked to a consultant last week who talked about how East Oregonian was literally just horrible to deal with. And not that they don't necessarily write good stories sometimes, and not that they don't have people who are trying to do good journalism, but just like we used to have in this country, Brian, competing papers, and there'd be a
Yeah.
Republican paper and a Democrat paper. And then we got this idea that it should all be homogenous and there should be one arbiter of the truth. And that's usually never a good idea because the truth is always somewhere in the middle, Brian. Somewhere between the talking points is the actual truth. And sometimes the truth is a little bit more Republican friendly and sometimes it's a little more Democrat friendly. But at the end of the day, I think what needs to happen is we need to get back to having the two sides holding each other accountable because that's when it works. And when there's just one control of media and one arbiter of the quote unquote truth, it doesn't work. And that's what you're seeing here at the end of the day is people don't feel represented by the journalists, a lot of them who either were liberal or learned to be liberal at journalism school instead of just being taught how to report facts and how to correctly position when people are bringing talking points and challenging those talking points. I would love it if journalists challenged us a little bit more. I would also love it if they challenged Democrats a little
Yeah.
bit more. And at the end of the day, I think that's why you're seeing this collapse of this business. It's not just the internet and ads. It's about how they've been running journalism for 50 years.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there's space for media, right? I mean, people consume media, whether they want to read it or they read it online or they get the newspaper. There's some challenges with actually printing a paper and getting them to people's homes, right? It's definitely a challenge with that, but it doesn't mean that all of a sudden that papers are non-existent because everybody's reading their news online. I think you just have to be nimble and you can't be left wing, right? A lot of the Pamplin papers like Eastern Oregonian, I think, and some of those other ones that they had were just not. Or is that the Bulletin? Is that part of this deal? I don't know. I haven't looked at the details of it, but I'm not sure who owns what. But I think that it's a Mississippi-based company. I noticed that, so maybe they are a little bit more right wing. But now here I am going against you, saying, well, maybe we need a right wing paper to combat the left wing paper, and then basically we get Fox News and CNN, right? And that's I think kind of what you're saying is we don't really want that. You want people challenging our positions, like challenge our position. I think you and I have pretty stark interest and decisive opinions, right? And I could be challenged. I don't mind that. Prove to me that I'm wrong, I guess. But I think reporters, like you said, I send out a press release, they call me, they get the facts, they write a story based on the facts, and maybe they get the alternative viewpoint, right? And that's all they're doing is reporting those viewpoints. And I think there's space for that, but I feel that, a lot of companies these days, and especially in my corporate side of my world where I've been, I'm a little bit more on the political side now, but we never liked, if I'm a car dealer, I don't want to be attached to a hit piece on Donald Trump or a hit piece on Biden, right? I don't want to be next to that. A car dealer just wants to sell cars and they want to sell them to Democrats and Republicans. And I think that's where these newspapers are losing dollars from their advertisers, is because they're so political that, if you advertise in there, then you're seen as political. And that's not what most companies want to do. They just want to sell a wash machine. They don't care. So
I think
interesting.
that's a great place to wrap it up. And Brian, we may get a little partisan at times, but we want Democratic listeners and Republican listeners and nonpartisan listeners and independent party listeners and progressive party listeners and Constitution Party listeners. We're
Yeah.
equal opportunity for
But
listeners. And so
here's all of them real quick. Let's end on with it. So in addition to Portland, because people can know the Portland Tribune, but includes the Herald Pioneer in Canby, the Sandy Post, the Clackamas Review, the Sherwood Gazette, Columbia County Spotlight, Southwest Portland Community Connection, Estacada News. Wow, there's an Estacada newspaper still going. The Portland Bee, the News Times in Forest Grove, the Washington County Times, the Gresham Outlook, Westland Tidings, that's a funny name, the Lake Oswego Review, the Wilsonville Spokesman, the Madras Pioneer, Woodburn Independent, Newburgh Graphic, Beaverton Valley Times, Oregon City News, and the Central Oregonian right here in Prineville. So it doesn't include Eastern Oregonian. I think that's owned by the Bulletin. So that's a lot of community papers there that are impacted by this, and a lot of those little newspaper stories and stuff that those newspapers carry. So it'd be interesting to see how the consolidation continues to work.
well, and a lot of those, Brian, they're just names with the same 5 journalists from Pamplin writing articles, and occasionally they write a local story. But a lot of it, they're just publishing regional stuff, and that's why nobody reads it, because they're like, "Where's my local news? Oh, great, another story about Portland, another
Yeah.
story about Oregon City. Awesome, nobody wants it."
Or reposting Julia Shumway articles that she gives away for free, which is great for Julia, right? But I mean, I see him in some of those local papers too, and I'm like, I've already read that online. Like now I see it in the Central Oregonian a week later than I read it online, which is just kind of silly. So they got to fix that problem. Timeliness of the news is important.
Brian, it's time for us to buy the paper there in Crook County and rename it the Crook County Crosstabs. We'll get to the bottom of all the stories out there. Speaking of Crosstabs, don't forget to follow crosstabs.studio. Crosstabs is on Twitter. Brian G. Iverson on Twitter. Reagan Canope on Twitter. That's where we do most of our social media. I refuse to set up a fake Facebook page, Brian. I just get tired of it.
Oh, and at Coach Iverson on Peloton. So if you want to follow me there.
You want to sweat it with Brian Iverson, that's
There
how
you
you
go.
do it. Appreciate everybody for listening, and looking forward to talking to you all next week.